On the 21st of September 1931, Britain broke a promise it had kept, with one wartime interruption for over 200 years. And the strangest thing happened. Nothing collapsed. The sky did not fall. In fact, within months, Britain was recovering from the worst depression of the modern age, while the countries that kept the promise sank deeper into ruin. The promise was gold. For 2 centuries, a pound sterling had meant a fixed, unchangeable quantity of gold, the anchor of the entire world's money, the standard against which every other currency set its clock. Economists called leaving it unthinkable. Bankers called it national suicide. One Bank of England official, told it had finally happened, said, "I did not know we could do that." This is the story of 1931, the year the world's money broke, the year Britain chose heresy over orthodoxy, and the year that quietly proved almost everything the experts believed about money was wrong. It is one of the least told turning points of the 20th century. And it decided the shape of every pound, dollar, and euro you have ever spent. Because the money in your pocket exists the way it does because of what Britain did in September 1931. To understand why leaving gold was unthinkable, you have to understand what the gold standard was, because it was not just a policy, it was a religion. And like most religions, it had a founding prophet, one you may not expect. In 1717, the Master of the Royal Mint fixed the price of gold in sterling at £3, 17 shillings and 10 pence halfpenny per ounce. His name was Isaac Newton. Yes, that Isaac Newton, the same man this channel has already watched, lose a fortune in the South Sea bubble. Newton's gold price was meant as a technical adjustment. It ended up standing, essentially unchanged, for 200 years. When men in the 1920s spoke of the pound's honor, they were defending a number Newton had set when Bach was writing cantatas. The promise survived its one great test by fire early. In 1797, with Napoleon's France threatening invasion and gold draining from the vaults, Britain suspended payment. Banknotes could no longer be swapped for metal, and spent 24 years on paper money while it fought the war. But here is what mattered to every banker who came after. In 1821, Britain went back at the full old rate and paid its promises in full. That resumption became the city's founding legend. Whatever the crisis, however long the detour, the pound always came back to gold. That legend is what made the promise sacred, and what made 1931 unthinkable. Under the gold standard, a country's currency was a fixed weight of gold wearing a national costume. A pound was 113 grains of fine gold. Notes were receipts. Gold was the money. And because every major currency was defined in gold, they were all effectively fixed to each other. One global system of money, automatic and beyond the reach of politicians. That was the whole point. Gold could not be printed. Gold could not be inflated by a desperate treasury. The rules enforced themselves. The enforcement mechanism was brutally simple, and it ran through one number: bank rate. If gold flowed out of Britain, the Bank of England raised the rate. Higher returns pulled money back to London, and the drain stopped. The city's men boasted that a high enough bank rate could draw gold from the moon. But notice who paid for the magnet. Every rate rise squeezed borrowers, businesses and workers at home. The system defended the currency by taxing the economy. In the sunlit decades before 1914, the squeezes were brief and the world barely noticed. Remember the mechanism, though, because the whole story of 1931 is what happens when the squeeze has to go on forever. And for the half-century before 1914, the system worked spectacularly. World trade tripled. Capital flowed anywhere on Earth. London sat at the centre, banker to the world, and the pound was so trusted that from Buenos Aires to Shanghai, contracts were written in sterling as if it were gold itself. If you want to know why the phrase, "as safe as the Bank of England" exists, this is when it was minted. Then, the First World War blew the system apart. Every combatant left gold to print money for the trenches. Prices doubled and tripled, and when the smoke cleared in 1918, the great question of the age was, how do we get back? Note the assumption inside the question. Not whether to go back. How? To the men who ran the world's money in the 1920s, the pre-war gold standard was civilization. Going back was not economics, it was restoration, putting the world back the way it was meant to be. No one held that faith more completely than the man who ran the Bank of England for the entire era, Montagu Norman. Norman was the high priest of the Restoration, secretive, theatrical, so famous for his nerves that he travelled under false names, and so influential that central bankers across Europe were called his disciples. To Norman, returning the pound to gold at its old value was nothing less than Britain's word of honour. Remember him too. The story ends with his nerves, and not well. And so, in 1925, Britain went back. The Chancellor of the Exchequer who signed the order was Winston Churchill, and he did it at the old rate. £1 equals $4.86, exactly as in 1914, as if the war had never happened. Strictly, what returned was not quite the old religion. The new arrangement was a gold bullion standard. The sovereign coins of the pre-war world never came back into circulation, and the bank would redeem notes only in whole 400-ounce bars. Gold for central banks and millionaires, not for wallets. It was restoration as theatre. The public saw the sacred number restored, $4.86, while the metal itself quietly retreated into vaults, which tells you what the exercise was really for. It was never about the coins, it was about the number and the city's claim to be trusted with the world's money. Churchill, to his credit, smelled the danger. In March 1925, he staged a private dinner and made the experts argue it out in front of him. Keynes against the Treasury and bank men, the heretic against the priesthood. Keynes, off form and outnumbered, lost the room. The officials assured Churchill that the pain would be modest and the prestige eternal. Churchill signed and left behind one of the most revealing complaints a minister has ever put on paper, telling his officials he would rather see finance less proud and industry more content. He got neither. It was a decision made for pride and for the City of London's prestige against a lone dissenting roar. John Maynard Keynes, the most brilliant economist alive, and at the time a heretic, published a furious pamphlet titled The Economic Consequences of Mr. Churchill. His argument was simple arithmetic. British prices had risen far more than American prices since 1914. At the old exchange rate, everything Britain sold to the world was now roughly 10% overpriced. To live at that rate, British wages and prices would have to be forced down 10%, and wages, Keynes warned, do not go down without blood. Keynes lost the argument. Britain rejoined gold. And then everything he predicted happened, in order. British coal, steel, ships, and cotton, the old industrial heartlands, became uncompetitive overnight. Exports sagged. To defend the exchange rate, the Bank of England had to keep interest rates punishingly high through the whole decade, a permanent brake bolted to a struggling economy. Unemployment never fell below 1 million. The blood Keynes predicted arrived in the coal fields first. The mine owners' answer to uncompetitive exports was longer hours and lower wages. The miners' answer was a slogan: not a penny off the pay, not a minute on the day. In May 1926, the confrontation detonated into the general strike. Around 1.75 million workers out, the largest labour confrontation in British history. 9 days in which buses were driven by university students and the government printed its own newspaper. The strike collapsed. The miners were starved back over months, and the bitterness of it poisoned British industrial life for a generation. All of it traced the chain back to defend $4.86. While America roared through the 20s, Britain limped, sacrificing its industries year after year on the altar of the old exchange rate. Churchill later called it the greatest mistake of his life, and he had made it on the advice of every respectable expert in England. Keynes had a name for the whole creed by then. He called gold a barbarous relic, a phrase that scandalized the city and stuck to the century. And underneath his insult sat an arithmetic problem nobody wanted to face. The world's gold was no longer where the world's trade was. Through the 1920s, the metal drained relentlessly into two great vaults, the United States and France, until, by the end of the decade, those two countries between them sat on roughly half the world's monetary gold. A standard that worked when gold circulated among many nations was now a game in which two players held most of the chips and, crucially, refused to play by the old rules. Instead of letting the inflows raise their prices and rebalance the system, they sterilized them, locked the gold away, and let the rest of the world starve for reserves. The automatic machine had stopped being automatic. Everyone else, Britain first among them, was left defending fixed exchange rates against a current that could no longer reverse. Then came the crash of 1929 in America, and the world's gold religion turned from expensive to fatal. As world trade collapsed, every country on gold faced the same trap. The rules of the standard demanded that a country losing gold must raise interest rates and cut spending, squeeze itself to hold its currency's fixed value. In a boom, that discipline was tolerable. In the greatest depression in history, it was madness. The rules commanded every sinking economy to bail water into its own boat. Prices fell, which made debts heavier, which broke banks, which made prices fall further. The gold standard had become a machine for transmitting collapse from country to country at the speed of the telegraph. The machine found its weakest point in the spring of 1931 in Austria. Credit-Anstalt, the largest bank in the country, failed in May, and the failure ran along the wires. from Vienna to the German banks that had lent there then, as Germany's system froze over the summer, to London, because British banks had lent heavily to Germany, and that money was now trapped. The world's bankers looked at Britain, the system's anchor, and began, for the first time in 200 years, to do the unthinkable arithmetic. Britain had lent long and borrowed short. Its gold reserves were thin, its budget was in deficit, its industries had been hollowed out by 6 years at the wrong exchange rate. The anchor of the world's money was, on inspection, a country that could not afford its own promise. In July 1931, the run began. Gold started leaving the Bank of England at a rate of £2.5 million a day. What followed was a national panic conducted in the politest possible language. The bank raised interest rates, the sacred remedy, and the gold kept leaving. Emergency credits were arranged from Paris and New York and were consumed within weeks. Then Britain's own committees began, with impeccable timing, to shoot holes in their own ship. In mid-July, the Macmillan Committee, convened to study finance, with Keynes himself among its members, published figures revealing just how much short-term foreign money was parked in London against how little gold stood behind it. 2 weeks later came the May Report, a review of the public finances that forecast a budget deficit of some £120 million and prescribed savage economies. Both documents were meant to reassure by candour. Both did the opposite. They handed every foreign creditor, in official print, the arithmetic of Britain's weakness. The run accelerated on publication, a lesson in crisis management that treasuries have been relearning ever since. In a panic, an honest audit is indistinguishable from a confession. The Labour government tore itself apart over the price of rescue. The bankers' terms required cutting unemployment benefit by 10% in the depths of a depression to reassure foreign creditors. Consider what was actually being asked. A government elected by working people was told, by the bank, by New York lenders, by its own officials, that the condition of saving the currency was taking money from the unemployed at the bottom of the worst slump in memory. Half the cabinet could not do it. The government fell on the 24th of August, and its leader, Ramsay MacDonald, walked back into Downing Street the same day at the head of a national government built with his opponents to pass the cuts his own party had refused, an act his movement branded the Great Betrayal, while his supporters called it the only honest course. Labour would spend a decade calling the whole affair a banker's ramp, a manufactured crisis to break a workers' government. The truth was crueler than conspiracy. Nobody had manufactured anything. The machine was simply doing what the machine did, demanding its sacrifice, indifferent to who was on the altar. And the run continued anyway. By September, counting the borrowed credits and the vanished gold together, the defence of the pound had consumed sums in the hundreds of millions, real money, at a time when a skilled man earned £4 a week and bought nothing but delay. And the high priest? Montagu Norman's nerves gave out. At the height of the crisis, on doctor's orders, the governor of the Bank of England was sent across the Atlantic to rest, leaving his deputy to fight the run, which produced one of the strangest footnotes in financial history. When the decision finally came, the bank cabled the returning Norman a coded message: "Old lady goes off on Monday." The old lady of Threadneedle Street, going off gold. Norman, The story runs, read it as news that his elderly mother was taking a holiday. The man who had rebuilt the world's gold standard learned that it was over only when his ship docked. Then came the blow no one had priced in. In mid-September, at the naval base at Invergordon in Scotland, the sailors of the Royal Navy, told their pay was being cut, in some cases by a quarter, refused duty. It was technically a mutiny, quiet, orderly and devastating. The Royal Navy was the symbol of British invincibility. If Britain could not pay its own sailors, the world concluded, the game was over. In the 2 days after Invergordon, the Bank of England lost more gold than in any 2 days in its history. The final week was a hemorrhage dressed as routine. Each morning the bank posted its figures. Each figure was worse. Tens of millions of pounds in gold and credits bled away in the last days alone, and the men in Threadneedle Street could now calculate, almost to the hour, when the vaults would fail to meet the next demand. With Norman still at sea, it fell to his deputies to carry the arithmetic across town, to walk into Downing Street and tell the Prime Minister, in the measured language of central bankers, that the thing every British government for 2 centuries had sworn to defend could no longer be defended by Wednesday. On Saturday, the 19th of September, the bank's remaining defences were hours from exhaustion. That weekend, the decision was finally taken, not in triumph, but in exhaustion. Officials drafted a 1-page bill. Ministers who had destroyed their party 3 weeks earlier to save the gold standard now initialed its death warrant, and the stock exchange was told to stay shut on Monday while the world absorbed the news. On Monday, the 21st of September, 1931, Parliament suspended the gold standard. The pound was cut loose from the metal it had been chained to since Isaac Newton ran the mint. And here is the detail that gives the whole story its strange, very British flavour. Nothing happened in the streets. No riots, no bank queues, no burning of effigies. The country that had torn out a government to defend the sacred number watched the number die and went to work. The panic had always lived in the telegraph wires between London, Paris, and New York, never in the high street. When the promise finally broke, the public discovered what the foreigners had known for weeks, and the bank had known for months. The promise was already gone. All that ended on that Monday was the pretending. 200 years of orthodoxy ended in a 1-page act rushed through in an afternoon. Everyone braced for catastrophe, hyperinflation, ruin, the end of British credit. The pound fell from $4.86 to around $3.50 and stabilised. And then, through 1932 and 1933, the catastrophe stubbornly refused to arrive. Instead, released from its golden handcuffs, the Bank of England cut interest rates from 6% to 2% and left them there for the rest of the decade. Cheap money flowed, and Britain promptly ran history's politest victory lap over its own dead orthodoxy. The government seized the moment to refinance the crushing legacy of the First World War, converting billions of war loan from 5% interest down to 3.5%, one of the largest debt operations ever conducted, saving the Treasury tens of millions a year, possible only because money was finally cheap. A housing boom began, peaking at over 300,000 houses a year, the semi-detached suburbs that still ring every English town, built by private builders on 2% money. Exports revived at the cheaper exchange rate. Britain's recovery from the Great Depression began quietly almost from the month it left gold. Stranger still, the world did not abandon the pound. It followed it. Within months, some 24 countries, the Commonwealth, Scandinavia, Portugal, a swathe of trading nations, pegged their currencies not to gold but to sterling, forming what became known as the Sterling Bloc. The promise, it turned out, had never really been about the metal. It was about Britain. The world trusted the manager more than the anchor. And the manager, freed, quietly outperformed the faithful. By the middle of the 1930s, British industrial production had climbed well past its pre-crash peak, while gold bloc France still languished below hers. Unemployment, though cruel in the old export towns, fell year after year as the new industries, cars, aircraft, electrics, the million new houses, pulled the economy forward on cheap money. Nobody called it a miracle, because it did not feel like one. The recovery wore cardigans, not laurels, but set beside the countries still chained to the metal, the quiet numbers were the loudest verdict of the decade. And the countries that stayed loyal to the metal, they got the full punishment. The United States clung to gold until 1933, deflating all the way down into 25% unemployment, and when Roosevelt finally broke the link, he did it with a brutality Britain never attempted, ordering private citizens to surrender their gold, a story we tell properly on our American channel. France held out longest of all until 1936 and spent the mid-30s in permanent slump while Britain grew. The pattern is one of the cleanest natural experiments economics has ever run. Country after country recovered in almost the exact order it abandoned gold. The heresy was the cure. The deepest lesson took decades more to sink in. Money, it turned out, was not gold wearing a costume. Money was a promise, managed by institutions, and it had been all along. The discipline of the gold standard, so worshipped by the men of 1925, was real. It disciplined governments by punishing their citizens. What 1931 proved was that the discipline was optional, and that a country in a depression that chooses the metal over its people has made a choice, not obeyed a law of nature. The world built its next monetary system at Bretton Woods in 1944, with Keynes himself at the table, gold kept on a long leash, currencies adjustable, the old automatic punishment machine deliberately left out. And when even that link finally snapped in 1971, money became what it had been in practice since September 1931, a managed promise backed by nothing but the institutions that issue it and the belief of the people who hold it. And if this story feels somehow familiar, a Britain chained to an exchange rate it cannot afford, bleeding reserves to defend a number chosen for prestige, until one September day the markets force what the politicians would not choose, it should. 61 years later, almost to the week, Britain did the whole thing again with the European exchange rate mechanism, and the ending was identical. Humiliation on the day, recovery almost from the moment the peg broke. We told that story in this channel's very first film. Same lesson, same country, same month of September. History does not repeat, but in Britain's case it apparently resits the exam. So what does 1931 teach? That the unthinkable is usually just the untried. I did not know we could do that, is the epitaph of every orthodoxy. That an economic rule which requires a nation to destroy itself to obey it will eventually not be obeyed. That expert consensus can be perfectly unanimous and perfectly wrong. Every respectable authority endorsed 1925, and one heretic with a pamphlet was right, and that the money in your pocket is a promise, not a substance, which means the real question about any currency is never what backs it, but who manages it and for whom. Britain learned that, in the politest panic in financial history, in 3 summer months of 1931, the world has been living on managed promises ever since. Sources for this account include the Bank of England's records of the 1931 crisis, Treasury and Cabinet papers from August and September 1931, the Royal Mint's records of Newton's 1717 valuation, Keynes's published writings of 1925 and 1931, records of the 1932 war loan conversion, and the Admiralty records of the Invergordon incident.